It says we're live on air. Good evening, everybody. Julian Freeman from thestarsofwellbeing.com. And as you probably know, if you read the newsletter, etc., I just got to the usual. This is the cheesy. It's January. You got to pay for Christmas. Money thinking comes to the fore. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with all those bills? And to help me talk about that this evening, I've got the very lovely Viv Barclay. Good evening, Viv.
Good evening, Julian.
And now Viv and I have worked on the whole subject of money. You're a specialist. That's one of the things that the topic areas that you coach people with, right?
Yeah, it's something that I've kind of fallen into by accident. I think probably because I didn't really set out for it to become like a niche or a speciality, but I started coaching people around it because it was an issue for me, to be honest. And in the coaching relationship for me is very collaborative, and so in looking at money from a three principles point of view with other people looking with me as well, then it helped me to see what was going on. So not just for them, but for me as well. So it helped me deepen my understanding.
Nice. I remember you saying to me on one of our conversations that money is neutral, and that used to really get me going. That did.
Yeah, that really stopped you dead in your tracks, didn't it? It was like, what?
Exactly. I was like, money can't be neutral. Surely not. And it reminds me of an old Jamie Smart thing. I remember him saying to us, I was in one of his groups, to your ATM, and you put your card in, and a number comes up on the screen, and all of a sudden you're either happy or unhappy, and yet all you're looking at is some digits on a screen.
Yeah.
And I kind of see how ludicrous that is.
I remember having a
because in one moment, go on.
Sorry, no, go on. You go on. Sorry.
But in one moment you can be completely unaware, and then here's another great example. I used to be, I think a lot of people do this, but a brown envelope comes through your letterbox.
Oh, goodness me, yes.
And you haven't even turned over, like, to the window pane to see to even guess who it's from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you already have thinking about, oh my God, what is this?
Yeah. I remember a few years ago, before I did Super Coach Academy, I rang Michael Neal on his radio show, and I was talking to him about money, and he basically gave me a bit of a telling off. It was really funny. He was saying that it really kind of amazed him how it was that people could get so freaked out about numbers on a piece of paper or in their bank accounts, and that what they amounted to basically were like monsters under the bed. And I sat there listening to him, feeling kind of embarrassed that I'd phoned up in the first place. But I heard it, but I didn't get it, because at the time I was really suffering with my financial situation, and that's just reminded me of a conversation that we were having about illness with Libby Hodges. I heard her talking about that the other day, and it's like there's illness, and then there's suffering. And it's like suffering is the choice, that's what we choose to do. And the illness comes and goes. but the suffering can stay pretty long term. And I, you know, on reflection, really, I've chosen to suffer about my financial situation for such a long time, and it's like, oh, for goodness sake, for goodness sake. And even now, I could, you know, I know that there's a choice there. There's a thought that's coming up that's like, you know, well, you stupid cow. You know, and I could beat myself up about the fact that I've chosen to suffer. But you know, I'm not going to go there because well, I'm just not going to go there. It's a bit of a waste of bloody time. But you know, it was what it was. I think I think I've learned from it, and I think you know, there's truth certainly for me in the fact that everything that we're going through, whilst it might not feel very pleasant, and whilst it might not be something that we choose for ourselves, that it is nudging us in the right direction. That everything that's happening is nudging us in the right direction, and by that I mean that we can take something from it. We can take we can learn from it.
As my mum always used to say, something good will come of this. She always used to, whenever I was talking to her about some situation that I was in, she'd be like, it might seem difficult now, but something good will come of this. And it's great. It's some of those old common sense adages is really, really valuable.
Yeah. Did you? I was watching a program last night, and there was a guy on there who's 93 years old, who was a survivor from Auschwitz. Did you see that on TV last night? Do you watch TV?
No.
I watch TV quite a bit. And this guy was just truly inspirational. And he's in a documentary might be on BBC Two, I think, at some point this week, commemorating the anniversary of, I think it's 70 years. And they asked him at the end of the interview, you know, what advice would you give today's generation? And he said to be optimistic. To be optimistic. I mean, he survived the most incredible, unimaginable awful situation, and he came out of it smiling. Really, he's made a real success of his life, and you know, I think there is a tendency with financial situations, particularly when we're looking at debt and looking at large amounts of debt, that it feels like life and death. It feels really seriously. It feels like we're being, you know, physically threatened, and but you know, we don't have to suffer. It doesn't have to be like that.
Well, that's really good. So let's just go on that a bit. I mean, there's a little bit of an old story now that was in the papers of, I don't know, a year or two back, where some guy who was a property developer, and the day before he was about to be declared bankrupt and all his properties taken off them, or etc., he killed his wife and daughter with a shotgun, gassed himself in his car in the garage, and burnt down his house. £1 million of house. And to me, that's a really drastic example of what you're talking about. People just think themselves into a really difficult place.
Yeah.
And for me, my thinking about money was always much more subtle than that, because there's really quite a complicated game you can play if you live in the UK anyway, where you have these things called credit cards. You stick money on credit cards, and then you can do a thing called a 0% balance transfer. So you take out another credit card, you put all the money on that credit card, and for 12 months you don't pay anything on it, apart from an initial fee.
Yeah.
But then you kind of got this scenario where you're still You know, you're borrowing. You still, because I think we got there because we all want stuff, right? And we all want to live a certain, go on holiday and all those kind of things. And quite often, or for me, it always seemed that my expenses were always more than my income. And so that's where the got to put it on a card, or don't worry, the card will flex it, and so on and so forth. Now, what that meant was, and that was at a time when, and it's coming again, where people wanted to lend you money. I think a huge part of the UK's GNP, you know, this is another game by the way, is people lending people money.
Yeah.
And so they want to lend you money because they make money lending you money. As long as you can pay.
Yeah.
But what it did was so what I was living off was other people's money.
Yeah.
And not monsters under the bed. I call it skeletons in the cupboard. You'd kind of do this balance transfer, and then you didn't need to worry about it for 12 months. And then 12 months came around, and you're like, no, it's all right. I'll find a way to pay it. I can win the premium bonds tomorrow. So whatever, something could happen. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
But it didn't. It ended up being like a game of backgammon, where I don't know if you serious backgammon players. They have a thing where they double the dice. They have some kind of gambling dice, so if you can get somebody to give up, a bit like poker, you can get somebody to give up the game, because the odds are too high. The risk is too high, and it seemed to me that was what life started to be like. Now this is interesting, because I'm starting to get into that realm of, oh my God, I've made up quite a story now about me and money.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't have money, because I could go out tomorrow and buy an expensive car and put it on a contract, or borrow the money or whatever. It's not about having the stuff. It's about my thinking about how am I going to pay the loans, and I've now got to go out and earn more money, and da-da-da. And that's the suffering thing that you were talking about, right?
Yeah, because we get into a situation, an event will occur, and the event means that we have to feel bad, and that's just like cultural conditioning. But there's, what you're talking about there is like cultural conditioning as well. There's something called obsolescence, which I think is a really lovely word for a fairly horrible thing, which is the promotion of having to have new stuff all the time, and things that, or companies like Apple, for instance, when they manufactured MP3s, the battery in the MP3 would last a certain amount of time, and when it failed, it worked out being cheaper to buy a new model than it was to get a battery replacement, and they purposely made it extremely difficult for you to replace the battery yourself. There was like a certain kind of screw that was used, that was only used on Apple products. So they made it, they kind of forced you, if you wanted one, you had to buy new. And IKEA have promoted this idea of new and fresh and bright, and the idea that things like furniture can be disposable. Like when my parents bought furniture, for instance, they invested a significant amount of money at the time in something called G-Plan furniture. And whatever the finish was on the suite, it started to flake off. And rather than chucking the whole lot out, then my mother took all of the pieces of material apart and reupholstered the whole thing, because there was nothing actually wrong with the sofa. But nobody would think of doing that. Well, very few people would think of doing that now. They just like chuck it out and get a new one, because this is the belief. It's the belief that old is doesn't serve us. It's you know, it's no use. It's outdated. It's old-fashioned, and so it's new. And I watched a program on BBC about compulsive shoppers last year, and there was a woman on there who was still living with her parents, and she had a reasonable job, but she spent all of her salary and more on going out and buying new stuff. And they filmed her bedroom, and all of the stuff was in her wardrobe, and still had the labels on it. And she said when she was being interviewed that she was going to have to curb her shopping habit because she really wanted a Mercedes. And the lady who was interviewing her said, "Well, what's that out on the drive?" And she said, "Oh yeah, but that's the old model. You know, the new model's coming out in 3 months, and I have to have the new." You know, so as a society, as a culture, there's you know, all of these cultural beliefs, these societal beliefs that we're fostering, that we you know, that we're buying into. Again, it's the illusion that we were speaking about previously.
The illusion. I mean, the illusion. I guess the illusion is about this game that we've created, and we as a society have created, and not all of the society. I mean, I think if you go to Eastern, you know, Asia and places like that, it's not like that. Although, you know, go to Bhutan. My dad went to Bhutan recently, and he was disappointed to see that most homes have a TV. The TV is now playing out all Indian and so on TV programs and adverts, and so they're starting to want everything that's possible to have, you know, being pushed through the TV, which they didn't before they had TV. And in China, most of the population used to live in the countryside. Now a lot of people will say, well, they had a horrible, very poor quality existence. Now a lot of them have migrated to the city. Huge number of people have migrated to the cities in China, and that gives them a better quality of more prosperity. So I'm not going to get Canutist here, if that's a word, and sort of try and hold back the tide, because people tend to go in that direction. But the price that I paid was one of having these monsters under, and you did too, was having monsters under the bed, as Michael Neal calls it, or skeletons in the cupboard, or a low level of anxiety and worry, you know, subtle but always there, about money.
Yeah, I mean,
what does that do to you? What does that do to the way you feel about life?
Well, I basically felt scared about everything, and you know, when I had money, I was scared that I couldn't handle it, and so I did what I could to get rid of it. And then when I didn't have money, I was scared of not being able to pay the bills, or having to borrow money, having to go to my parents to say, "Can you help me out? You know, I'm nearly 50 years old. Can I borrow some money?" You know, it's not a good feeling. And you know, it didn't do my self-esteem any good at all. And so I did a bit of investigation into why it was, you know, why did I have this issue with money. And one of the questions I asked myself was about my first memories of money, my first memories of handling money. And the memory that came up was when my brother and I went to, during the school holidays one day, we got the bus and we went to the swimming baths, which was 15 miles away from where we lived. And I was in charge of the money because although I was younger than my brother, I was deemed to be the sensible one, and he was in charge of the kit. And so we paid. There were no return tickets then, so we had to pay each way. And we went swimming. We bought something in the cafe, and then we were waiting at the bus stop to catch the bus back. And I realised that I'd messed up. I'd made a mistake, and we didn't have enough money to get back home. And so we were forced to get on the bus and explain what had happened, and it was hideous. I was mortified. And the bus driver was telling us off, and there were people on the bus that were looking at us to see what all the commotion was about and everything. And then when we got home, had to explain to my parents, and my mother wasn't best pleased. And so I realised that when I was looking back that I formed a belief at the time that I wasn't good at handling money. And something else happened very shortly afterwards, which kind of, confirmed that belief. I am not good at handling money, and so it's interesting. When I was reflecting on this the other day, and I was thinking, but why didn't I think about when I was at university, and everybody else had seemed to be struggling with their student loans and grants and what have you to pay for what they needed to pay for, and I actually had money left over, and so I was saving money as a student. I mean, this is unheard of. I was actually saving money, and I got myself a job and saved up, and that later on, I don't know, it didn't occur to me that actually that proves that I'm pretty good at handling money. But no, I chose to give energy and engage with the memory of screwing up when I was little. And so when I was in before I moved to Spain, I was working for a company, and I earned rather a large bonus, or it felt like a large bonus to me. And I put some of it away. I spent some of it, did some, home improvements, what have you. I paid off some debts. I gave some money to my parents. And in giving money to my parents, I ended up giving quite a lot of the money that I'd earned away. Like, I took people away on holiday. I gave money to my siblings as well. And so, because I felt really quite overawed, I suppose, by the amount of money that I earned, and I was like, wow, I did that. And I noticed feeling really uncomfortable with the amount of money that I was paid. And so I did my best, I think, just to get rid of it, to get it down to a certain amount where I felt more comfortable, which was not very much in the end, it was quite a small amount. And then I moved to Spain, and then got into a situation where it all went hideously wrong, and I went from being, earning on quite a regular basis to having virtually nothing. There were times when I was in Spain when I had less than €1 in my purse, and wondering, where the heck am I going to get money from? What the heck am I going to do? But it's interesting in that situation, because that wasn't just the once. I faced that situation on several occasions, and every time it happened, I'd say to myself, right, this is the last time. This is my line in the sand. This is not going to happen again. But then it did, and it went on for years. I was in Spain for 7 years, and it went on for at least 5 years whilst I was there. But every time I got to that situation where there was one day, I remember, I had 26 cents in my purse, and it was a Tuesday, and no money coming in until the weekend. And I'm like, I've got 2 children to feed, and myself, and 2 cats at the time as well. I'm like, what the heck am I going to do? And it's really interesting that in those circumstances that your head always clears. It always clears, and something always comes up. And I was teaching English or I had been teaching English at the time, and I ended up contacting old students and asking them if they wanted to continue classes, which they did, fortunately, and so that's how I got through. But in the end, when I came back from Spain, again it became really obvious that I just wasn't going to be able to continue out there, and so I ended up phoning my sister and asking her if she'd buy us tickets to get back. And so when I got back, I arrived with my youngest daughter at the time, and the clothes I was stood up in, and a suitcase full of clothes, and no job, nowhere to live, no money. And 5 years later, the situation couldn't be more different. I mean, I'm not saying that I've turned into a millionaire overnight, far from it, but we're extremely resourceful and extremely resilient. And in that 5 years since we landed, my consciousness has significantly changed, and I that's definitely the thing that I can point to that's made the difference.
So I want to wind back a little bit, because we've covered at least 3 things that I think are really, really valuable. Because I bet there are people that are watching this video now, or will watch it in the future, who came because they want money worries, no worries. That sounds like I can get rid of my money issues. And the truth is that this is not a video about I've got some little tip on the stock market. Just buy this and sell it next week, and you'll be fine. It's not that video at all. But we covered 3 things. First of all, we've covered the monster under the bed scenario. I love Mr. Neil. We'll use his analogy in rather than mine. But if you're living life worrying about what might happen to those little digits on the screen, that doesn't put you in a very good starter for 10, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I was I'm reminded of listening to Linda Pansky, and something that she said about her relationship with George in the early days, when she was thinking of, this isn't any good, this is not going anywhere, he's a complete nightmare, I'm no good at relationships, and so I think I'm going to jack it all in. And she had a conversation with Sid Banks, and he asked her to think about when they first met and all the good times and all of the things that she liked about him. And so she started thinking about that, and she said, well, why think about that? And he said, well, just think about that. And she really didn't understand, and so had another go at trying to explain what a difficult person George Pransky was to live with. And thinking that, she explained again that Sid would really get it this time. And he said to her again, you remember the time when you were really happy when you first met? She said, yeah. And he said, well, just think about that. And the insight that she had after that was that if she was going to continue looking at the problem, or what she considered, what she perceived to be the problem, it just suddenly dawned on her that the solution was not in the problem, and that she had to look somewhere else. And she didn't say anything else about it, I remember, and that kind of left me hanging. And I thought, well, the question for me was, well, where else do you look? And a couple of days later, it suddenly dawned on me that you can look anywhere else, outside of the problem, and anywhere else is going to be better than just rehashing and re-going over and reanalyzing and re-engaging with all of that thought content that's going on in your head about what your financial problem is. Because the solution does not exist in the problem. And being on a different level of consciousness, looking somewhere else outside of the problem, will give you a clue. You know, it helps to get clarity, to clear your head, and to it creates space. It creates space for something new, something that hasn't occurred to you, or something that has occurred to you before that you've now decided, oh, well, that makes sense, maybe I could do that.
Oh, so that's a fourth one. So, but it's very closely allied to the second. So the first one is monsters under the bed doesn't help. It's not constructive, doesn't take you anywhere, doesn't help you with anything. The second... They're not real.
No monsters under the bed.
Exactly, they're not real.
They're not real.
When you were a little kid and you had a bad dream, your mum came in, turned on the light, and oh, the shadows that you thought were monsters were gone.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Yeah.
The second thing is that you talked about that I think is really helpful for people is that you have stories. Like you told me about a story about how you handled money badly and a story about how you handled money well. And it's which stories that you give credence to.
Yeah.
But what you've just said is, like item number 4, is even more valuable than that, because none of those stories need to be true about you and money, about how good you are or bad you are, about, you know, with money. It doesn't matter. And because when you throw those stories aside, the Linda Pransky model, when you throw the look, our relationship, this is how our relationship would like to be, this is what I'd like to have with money, and this, I'm not getting it, and all that, so how do I get it, how do I, and when you let all those stories come into play and all that situation, and your skeletons are coming out of your cupboard as well, you know, that's not a good recipe for coming up with a solution. But what you just suggested is, and I'm totally with this, totally, is that when you can put all that to one side, when you can see it for the game in your head that you've decided or got drawn into and think is so real, when you can throw that away, then something else comes. Now, what I love about your 26 cents story is, you know, it's a bit like Richard Wilkins. He was a millionaire. He was just about to sign a deal where he was going to build a golf club, and that was it. 40 years old, retirement. That's it, millionaire retirement. And the stock market crashed. All his financial structure of his business went south, and the next day he had nothing, literally nothing. He'd been made bankrupt. He had to go to court and make himself bankrupt. But you know what? Just like you coming back from Spain, he survived that day. I mean, he lived on a bedsit floor, and he bought McVitie's chocolate biscuits to eat for a while. But it's amazing how resourceful we are, how the solutions come to us. And so a lot of those monsters under the bed things are like future stuff about how we're going to cope. And if we just realize that there are always options, and we are resourceful, and you know that's built right into us, then I think actually, rather than this being a very esoteric conversation, and not, I don't need to apologise, because what we've got here is something better than go put your money on this company and sell it next week, because that is a piece of Band-Aid. But being able to drop your not worry about the monsters. Be in and let go of your stories. Not worry about how good or bad you think you are with. What I love about that is that allows you to just live your life in a way where you do what feels right. You don't know how it's going to turn out, but if you have some trust in the fact that the resources you'll need, and money is one of those, will come to you at the appropriate time, then what a great place to start living your life from.
Mm. I can imagine what's coming up for me is I recall when I heard people saying, when you can get past your stories, when you can put your thinking aside, when you can see through that illusion, then you'll have a fantastic life. And I'm like, well, how the bloody hell do I do that then? Because this is real. This is what's going on. You don't get it. How do I do that? And I watched Dickon Bettinger do this, and I think you might have filmed it actually. He was talking about the kind of thinking that we do to ourselves that feels like, imagine my pen is a hammer, right? And it's like we hit ourselves, we do the equivalent of this, we hit ourselves in the head with a hammer. And we can feel the pain. Obviously we're suffering with it. We can feel the pain. But at this point in time, we can't see that it's us that's hitting ourselves. We can't see that we're doing it to ourselves. And in the moment that we see that we're doing it to ourselves, the moment that we can see that it's us that's holding the hammer, then we can put it down, then we can stop. And that's the moment when all of the stories kind of dissipate, evaporate, and that's when we can see through the illusion and we can put them aside. But we somehow have to get to that moment where we see that it's us that's doing it to ourselves, that it's us that's hitting ourselves in the head with a hammer. And how I did it, not that there really was a how, but it's about having faith, really. And during all of the time that I was at Super Coach Academy, and then listening to people like Dickon and listening to Elsie Spittle and reading all of the Sydney Banks books and everybody else that's out there, I was looking at them and thinking, they have seen something. They have seen something that has caused a shift, and therefore that means that there is something to see. And if I keep looking, if I just keep looking, and if I stay open, that at some point I will see, and I will see what it is that everybody else can see. And that happened last year. So it took me a while, but it happened last year. And I'm so grateful that I got to that point, because that's when that's when everything changed. That's when all of my finances changed, all of my thinking changed, and everything changed.
Lovely. Now so we've mentioned 4 things now, and then you kind of came in and said, well, we've told people to do 4 things, and really that's a lot of doing. And you're right, because there's actually a 5th thing in my experience that hard. And I love that you used the word faith, because your stuff is always happening. I was one of the guys that I was fortunate enough to send out I don't know, 20 plus books, people who want the money worries, no worries book that I offered.
Yeah.
It's only a little ebook, 22 pages, but it's an interesting read if you like more on this, and there's another book beyond that. But one of the guys that I was corresponding with, he was, caught up in that whole story of things have happened and things are happening and so on and so forth. And he was trying to kind of get at so what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the what I explained to him, and I think it's worth repeating, is for a while I used to fly. I used to get involved with aircraft simulators, and I used to try and fly them. And if you try and play with the controls too much, you crash the plane. I guarantee you crash the plane.
Mm.
I did every time. And if you're a trained pilot, you don't, because you've been taught to kind of be very gentle and smooth and understand how the plane flies. And essentially, if you're flying a non-military plane, they're built to fly straight and level. They're built just to fly straight. True. So you could take your hands off the controls, and the plane would be better off without you. When you try and start steering it one way or the other. And quite often, so the 4 things I've just told you to do, or suggested that you might do, or nirvana will come when you do those things, are actually irrelevant, because you can take your hands off the whole piece, and it will come right. And that's your point about being resourceful, and it's just the stuff. Another Jamie Smart thing: opportunity and money is being thrown at you all the time. But when you're wrapped in those stories and all the rest of it, you just don't see a lot of them, or you don't believe that they're for you, or whatever. If you just but enough comes to you to take you where you need to go for that, you'll stay flying. Now the great news is that whether you see it or not, those opportunities are coming your way.
Mm. Yeah, they're out there. For ages, because I was limiting myself with the kinds of thoughts that I was engaging with, and very little opportunity came my way because I just wasn't open to it. I mean, it was still out there, and the situation that I'm in at the moment, I'm working with the person who's or the company that is my landlord. And at the time when I moved, when I moved in here 5 years ago, it never even occurred to me. They were my landlord. They were taking what little money I had, and there didn't appear to be a possibility or an opportunity to work with them. And so I'm reminded a little bit of the Alchemist. They're going all the way around the world, and I went to Spain and back in search of, a successful life, if you like, or living life, or whatever.
When success was right there all the time.
And it was that right here, right in the place where I least expected to find it. And and the other thing that was coming up for me whilst you were talking there is that those people that are in really difficult positions, there are times when I have just taken myself off to bed and hidden under the bedclothes and pillow over my head and had a really good cry, and there is nothing wrong with that. I grew up again being chastised for crying or for getting emotional. But when we have a really good cry and we release all of that tension and all of that pent-up energy, it's like a clearing. We get rid of all of that dross, and then afterwards, there are times when I've stayed in bed for 2 or 3 days, and up until recently, I wouldn't dare have admit that to anybody because I was ashamed of spending time in bed feeling sorry for myself, But I see it now as a real kind of as a way of balancing myself out at the time. It's kind of, it was necessary for me to do that, to go and allow myself to feel really bad and to wallow in it, if you like. And then when I came out the other side, there was an idea, there was a direction, there was determination, there was something else there in place of all of that self-pity. And so I guess what I'm saying is that if somebody's feeling bad, it's not a bad thing. It's not something that we need to chastise ourselves about. That this is it's a natural part of who we are, and just to not to take it so seriously, and to just to allow yourself to feel it, because the other side means that you're more than likely to have a different idea, a new thought.
I love that. If I go back to your hammer thing, it's like if you're not careful, you hit yourself harder with the hammer. You try harder, and you end up hitting yourself harder with the hammer, not realizing that it's you that's doing it. Well, and if all we do on this hangout today is give people the sense of that they're holding the hammer, there's nobody doing it. The money isn't doing anything to you.
No, either the amount of it or the lack of it. It's not. It's completely neutral. We are meaning-making machines. It's in our nature to think, obviously, and we give meaning to the thoughts that we have, and therefore it's us that's giving meaning to the amount of money we have or we haven't got, or the amount of debt that we have or haven't got. The beauty of it really is that we can think anything we like, but we are also creatures of habit, and we tend to think the same things over and over again. We tend to think within the same sort of limits. We're bundles of habitual thought, and there's so much more out there that we can think if we allow ourselves to do so, so we can allow ourselves that space to think something different and to bring creativity and playfulness and fun, which I have to say, in the time when I was really suffering with my finances, it was the last thing that I thought was possible, was to be playful and have fun when it was so bloody damn serious. But hey, who knew? It works.
But I love that. So not only do you not have to worry about the skeletons in the cupboard, and do you have to carry all those old stories about whether you're good or bad or indifferent at something, etc. You get to live life in it as everybody's got creativity in them. I know there are people out there that'll go, well, I'm not a creative person, but we all are creative, inherently creative. So to be able to put those negatives aside, to be able to play with our creativity, to be playful, and to see a bit of lightness in life, wow, that's a huge, huge shift in the way life might feel, like the way life does feel most of the time for me. So I think that's a great place to wrap it up, as we only usually do 45 minutes. Okay. I'd like to just start by thanking you for doing this call with me. I think it's really timely. I think it's, hopefully when people's bills arrive in the next few days, their credit cards, etc., they won't get into all the stuff we've been talking about tonight. Or they'll go, maybe there's some credence to what they've been talking about, so that'd be lovely. And like I said, if you want the Money Worries, No Worries book, then email me, julian@starsofwellbeing.com. Viv's been talking about a whole load of stuff on from the 3 Principles, which is something originated by a guy called Sydney Banks. And I have a wonderful product called livingfromwisdom.com, where you can see Dickon Bettinger and all the people she mentioned teaching this and sharing their understanding of how life actually works when you look at it in this way. And I've also got, next hangout up is going to be a lady called Katia Simons. We're going to be doing something on health, because I think your physical health, life is a whole body experience. So let's talk about that. And how about you, Viv? What's your next step?
I am delivering some workshops at the moment for a client. I have a public workshop or seminar that is in Settle in North Yorkshire, and that is all about, it's called Wisdom at Work. I'm very proud of the title. I really like that. It brings a small smile to my face every time I think about that. Wisdom at Work. It's bulletproof yourself and your business with resilience. So it's looking at overcoming frustrations, dealing with disappointments, and the inside-out nature of resilience. How we can I was going to say how we can create that for ourselves, but it's innate. So we don't create anything. It's like how we connect with it. So that's what's coming up for me. And if anybody wants to come to that, then that's if they look at Wisdom at Work on Eventbrite, then hopefully they should find us.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
If anybody's got any questions, any money issues, because money's always been my big thing. That's why my book's called Life Beyond Money, because it's really about money's been one of my big stories, and getting past that's been a challenge for me. Viv's, as you found out today, Viv's also, money's a big issue for her. So you can either contact me at julian@starsofwellbeing.com, and let's start a conversation about how it's a current view and how what we've been talking about today could help, or how would they get in touch with you, Viv, if people want to talk to you about it?
My email is viv@vivcoach.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Hope you've really enjoyed this evening. I've loved talking to you. I think it's a great subject. I think we can all live life very differently, and some of us do, and more of us do. So yeah, thank you, Viv.
It's definitely possible. Definitely possible. I think if I've done it, it sounds like a real cliche to say, but if I can do it, anybody can do it. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, and have a good night, everybody.